This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. That is Matthew 18:15, guys. As always, I want to start by thanking you. So thank you so much to our donors. We're so thankful for all of you listening to the show today. You are what makes everything keep going here. But I did want to ask you to do one more thing, right? I asked you to donate and I asked you to, pay attention and share and all that. But leave a review. If you have not left a review wherever you're listening to this, whether that's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else, please go ahead and do that. That does help us with the algorithms and everything else. And I got a review the other day, and to be honest, I don't read the reviews because, I get a lot of nice ones, but I get some that are not so nice, and I just, tend to focus on the negative. But it was just so dumb because it was a 2-star review. It's like, I don't understand why people leave anything other than a 1, a 4, and a 5. A 2 and a 3 just seem funny. But the caption was Daunted Life. And I guess I should have been offended by that, but I just thought it was so hilarious. But that is a 2-star review that is just hanging out there on Apple Podcasts now. So we need some 5-star reviews. So guys, if you want to give us a 5-star review, 4 or below, just move on with your life. Just don't, worry about it. But 5-star reviews, we absolutely love those. And also want to remind you that on May the 17th, I will be presenting a presentation live at Church of 1122, and it's my Defeating Pro-Abortion Arguments presentation. That will be at the main campus. That's the San Pablo campus, which is 14286 Beach Boulevard, number 2 in Jacksonville, Florida. We have an official time. I don't know if I've announced this yet, but it is 7 p.m. So May the 17th, that is a Friday, 7 p.m. If you are anywhere near Jacksonville, I know people that are actually flying in to come and watch that. We just absolutely love our fans, but we will be in the main area where Joby does his thing. And I'm going to have his podium set up the same way that he does during his sermons. I may try to break it or just move it a few degrees left or right just to really jack with him, but it should be an awesome, awesome time. But guys, it is all about equipping you to be able to push back the darkness that is the scourge of killing babies in the womb. So you got to make sure you're there 7 p.m. on May the 17th at the San Pablo campus of Church of 1122. And also, I know we announced this Tuesday, but we'll announce it again today. When I was with Joby Martin last, he gave me a bunch of his books. He gave me 4 boxes full of his books, and a lot of you have already got these, but I've got about 65 of his books to give away, and he signed all of them. And the way that I'm going to get these into your hands, okay, is that anyone that gives a one-time donation through our site, that's Undaunted.Life/donate, Undaunted.Life/donate, anyone that gives a donation, a one-time donation of $30 or more, emphasis on the or more, you will get one of these books. So this is first come, first served. There is no cutoff date to this. And so if you're like the 66th person or something like that, I'm sorry, I'll try to announce it as quickly as possible. But just know that this will go to a good cause regardless of if you get a book or not, okay? Because half of the money, this is what Joby and I decided, because it's like, hey, let's raise money for Undaunted.Life, but let's also do something else and let's fight for the unborn. So half of the money raised is going to go to support Undaunted.Life and all of our operations, and the other half is going to go to support the Hope Pregnancy Center here in Central Oklahoma. That is our pro-life pregnancy center. So guys, this money, let me tell you where this money goes, because this is part of the 1010 Life initiative through what they're doing at Church of 1122 and making sure that we are pro-life from womb to tomb and all that. But if you give money to the Hope Pregnancy Center, this goes to pay for ultrasounds, which are expensive. This goes to pay the doctors that read the ultrasounds. This goes to pay to create pots of money so that when women are like, I'm poor, I can't really afford this kid, this money goes to help pay rent, to buy vehicles, to buy formula, to buy clothing, to buy cribs, to buy strollers, to buy all of that stuff. This also goes to support the men who are gonna stand by their women that they have impregnated and to be a father. That's where this money goes. Okay, so this isn't paying for pizza parties and for lavish vacations. Okay, this is literally going to help these people convince these women, look, you have other options. You don't need to kill this baby. Let's bring it to term, okay? So again, go to Undaunted.Life/donate. The link is in the show notes. Again, any one-time donation of $30 or more will get you a book. But this is very, very important. If you give me a one-time donation and don't do this, I won't know that you're doing this to get a book or that this needs to, half of it needs to go to the Hope Pregnancy Center. So make sure you put your name and address in the comments section on the donation, okay? So when you go to that site, make sure everything's spelled correctly, double check it, but basically you put in your donation amount, and there's a little checkbox that says write us a comment, and you can put your shipping information there. Make sure you have your name and make sure you have your address. Make sure everything is spelled correctly. First 65 of you will get copies of Joby Martin's books. They're right here. So if the tomb is empty, and anything is possible. Okay, boom, there we go. All right, quick hitters today. We're going to be talking about Max Holloway delivering the greatest knockout in MMA history, Joe Biden trying to turn Easter into tranny Christmas, Caitlyn Clark somehow saving and ruining women's basketball simultaneously, a gay man in Chicago being arrested for allegedly distributing child pornography and planning to rape his newborn son. Yes, you definitely want to stick around for that story. It is absolutely maddening. And then the NAIA, that's the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, adopting a new policy banning males from competing in women's sports. But we need to talk about something that literally you guys have been bothering me. And I'm okay to be bothered by you guys because you're my guys. You're my dudes. But Mark Driscoll and his most recent kerfuffle that he caused in his controversy, and it went mega viral and all that. I got to say, as soon as this went down, I was getting flooded with messages. We'll get there. So in general, some of you guys have wondered my thoughts on Mark Driscoll just because of what was the name of that podcast series? The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, not Mark Hill. The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. A lot of you guys are like, hey, Kyle, I want to know what you think about all this. And, did you listen to it? And it's like, well, no, I'm not going to listen to a 20-hour podcast series that only presents one viewpoint and doesn't actually interview the person that is the center point of all the, the lightning rod of all this stuff. So for me, I've always really enjoyed Mark Driscoll. And so I've kind of over the years, had some times where I was listening to his sermons and not listening to his sermons. I've never read any of his books or anything like that, but he just seems to be an incredibly gifted and talented speaker and expositor of the scriptures. And so in general, it's like, okay, I don't know if any of this stuff about him is true, but I think a lot of people just really don't like how forward he is and how much he works with men, and he's considered toxically masculine and all that. It's like, well, I don't know any of that personally, so I'm just going to try to listen to his sermon content. But I was at the Acts 29 conference here a few weeks ago, and I just started getting flooded with messages and emails and DMs asking me my thoughts on the Mark Driscoll controversy. And while I'm sitting there, because, I'm hanging out with Joe B. Martin and Matt Chandler, and I'm meeting a bunch of great people there at the Acts 29 Pastors Conference, and I was like, okay, what happened? Because my first thought was he probably said something that everybody took completely out of context, or you just took wrong, or he was too forceful about it, and everyone got all sensitive. And so I just go to Twitter. Again, I can't call it X. That's so stupid. I go to Twitter and I just search Mark Driscoll and I see this video, and it's this really grainy kind of iPhone video. You can tell this person took the video from like pretty far away. They look to be in this arena or something like that. And the first thing I found, this first video, was Driscoll speaking from a stage, and he was delivering a rebuke. Okay, so he was on stage at the 2024 Stronger Men's Conference, which is hosted by a pastor named John Lindell, who runs River City Church. Okay, so I don't know anything about John Lindell. Some of you may have strong opinions about him. I'd never heard of him before this, okay? Now, I would play the audio from what Driscoll said, but it is like super low quality, and it would only get worse with me ripping it from the internet and then throwing it into my editing software or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the transcript of what Driscoll said, and if I can remember, I'll put in the show notes him actually saying it. So let me read the transcript of what Mark Driscoll said while on stage at the 2024 Stronger Men's Conference, again hosted by John Lindell. Okay, so here's Driscoll. Let me do this. I've been up since 1 o'clock in the morning. The reason I'm hoarse is that I have been praying for you, and my heart is very burdened for you. And I want to be very careful that this is with this, and it's not what I want to say, but the Jezebel spirit has already been here. The Jezebel spirit opened our event. This is a rebuke and a correction of no one. This is an observation. Before the word of God was opened, there was a platform. It was a high place. On this was a pole of Asherah, the same thing that was used in a strip club for women who have the Jezebel spirit to seduce men. In front of that was a man who ripped his shirt off like a woman does in front of a pole at a strip club. That man then ascended. See, our God is not arrogant. He doesn't ascend. Our God is humble. He descends. And then, now, at this point, Lindell, the pastor hosting this, he screams out from the crowd, "Wrong time, Mark." Then we go back to Driscoll. He swallowed a sword, and Jesus cried. Lindell, again, from the crowd, screams, "Wrong time, Mark." Driscoll, again, now acknowledging this, says, "Okay, Pastor John, I'll receive that." Lindell from the crowd screams, "You're done." And then Driscoll says, "Thank you." He gathers up his notes and his Bible, and he walks off stage. Everyone's very, very confused. They don't know what's going on, but a lot of these guys paid money to go there and see Driscoll talk. And in his first few minutes of his comments, he's gathering these things and he's walking off stage. Okay, so Lindell gets on stage and he's trying to talk to the crowd, but they're booing him loudly. Again, there's a certain percentage, because there's thousands of men here apparently. There's a certain percentage of them that are just really confused, what in the world was that? They have no idea what's going on. But then there's another group of people, these are Driscollites or whatever, they are just shouting Lindell down, okay? But then finally, whenever the crowd subsided just a little bit, the loudness subsided, Lindell says this, "Wow, let me just say this. If Mark wanted to say that, he should have said it to me first. He didn't. Matthew 18, Matthew 18. If your brother offends you, go to him privately. I talked to Mark for a half hour. There was not one word of that. He's out of line. If you want to say it, he can say it to me. You may not agree with me, you may not agree with him, but we are brothers in Christ and there's a right way to handle this. And I'm telling you, I'm not going to sit back and watch someone do publicly what they should have done privately. And as a pastor and a man of God, I'll call another man of God out. And I love Mark, but he was out of line. And I have a responsibility spiritually for this event. And we saw 530 people come to Christ. And we're going to conduct ourselves in a Christian manner, and we're going to go according to the Bible. And the Bible tells us how that should have been resolved, and it wasn't. Okay? So at this point, I'm thinking, whoa. They literally opened a Christian men's conference with a gay stripper? That's nuts. Again, the first video I saw was of Mark Driscoll saying what he was saying, and then Lindell getting up there, and I was like, holy cow. Mark Driscoll said they opened this thing with a gay stripper. But then I go and see the video of the performance that opened the event. And my initial thought was, wait a minute, that's not a stripper. That's like an acrobat. That's like a Cirque du Soleil guy. That's like one of those guys that doesn't work out in the gym, but works out on a playground. And so there's poles or whatever, and they can grab onto the pole, and they've got the core strength to have their body out parallel to the ground. I was like, that's an acrobat, not a stripper. And so at this point, I'm like, wait a minute, Lindell's off his rocker. Why in the world would they start out a Christian men's conference with something like that? But then I was like, no, that's an acrobat. It's kind of a weird way to start everything out, bring out an acrobat who's also a sword swallower, but okay. So now I'm thinking, okay, Driscoll has never seen an acrobat perform before. He sees somebody and he thinks that's a stripper, and it's no, that's just an acrobat. But then I see that later in the conference, Lindell and Driscoll appeared on stage together, and apparently that they had reconciled. Okay, so Lindell gave Driscoll his flowers for a bit, and then Driscoll gave Lindell his flowers for a bit. Driscoll said that he should have talked to Lindell before doing what he did. He called Lindell his spiritual father, and Lindell warned the crowd not to criticize men appointed by God, which was kind of weird. Well, actually, no, it wasn't kind of weird. It was very inappropriate. Because Lindell basically straight up said, I surmise that this person has been anointed by God, and so if you criticize him, then you are, criticizing God, right? Which, keep that in mind as we continue going through this nonsense. So now, after seeing the kind of the reconciliation on stage thing, I'm thinking, all right, well, Driscoll either legitimately realized that he was in the wrong, that he was in error, or he folded like an old lawn chair. One of the two. Then I see more information about the acrobat guy that kind of started this whole problem, this whole issue. So apparently his name is Alex Magala. I'm not exactly sure how he pronounces his last name, but we'll just go with Magala. So he was on Britain's Got Talent. He's decently well known for his pole acrobatics and sword swallowing and some of these types of things. And after all this, went viral, he released a public statement on his social media stating that he's a born-again Christian. So now I'm thinking, well, this is an absolute mess. Lindell says that Magala has been a Christian for a decade, and Magala himself confirms that. And so it looks like Driscoll really screwed the pooch on this one. Then I found a 2016 article from Daily Mail, and it revealed that Magala had been dancing and stripping in gay bars after his supposed conversion to Christianity. After it. And also Magala had made social media posts of himself performing these kind of weird Buddhist esque religious rituals that have nothing even tangentially in common with Christianity or how we perform Christianity. And then when people were claiming that he had been, stripping in gay bars after he'd become a Christian, he came out to clarify, to say, no, I wasn't stripping at gay bars. I was go-go dancing. So go-go dancers are, people, they're like women, like up in cages and they're dancing. Those people are dancing for the sexual gratification of the people that are watching them dance. And so he would go to gay bars and dance for the sexual arousal and gratification of gay men, post supposedly becoming a Christian. So at this point, I'm thinking, this is nuts, and it certainly cannot get any weirder. Can't get weirder at all, right? Well, of course it can get weird because everything is stupid. Because then Lindell, in a service at his church, he just excoriates Mark Driscoll, just eviscerates him. So the guy, he was last seen, slurping while on stage at this men's conference. Now he's all mad again. So this video has since been taken down by his church. But if we know anything, we know that if you take a video or a tweet or something like that down, it only brings more attention to it. So you can certainly find it. I'll put it in the show notes. But Lindell claimed that Driscoll was spreading lies about Lindell, about James River Church, about the acrobat guy, Alex Magala, the stripper. And he said that they were demonic lies. And Lindell also said that they were in the final stages of the reconciliation process described in Matthew 18. So let me actually read that from Matthew. Well, no, I'll actually read a quote from him where he's talking about it, Matthew 18. So this is Lindell referring to the situation with Driscoll. The Bible gives us a 3-step process for resolving conflicts, not just conflicts between believers, but a plan for confronting sinful behavior. Step 1, you go to the person and point out their fault just between the two of you. Step 2, if the person does not repent, you involve 1 or 2 other people. Step 3, if they refuse, you tell it to the church. So, with great sadness, I let you know that we are in step 3. Let me just say that I've known Mark since 2008, when the church that Mark pastored, Mars Hill, fell apart, and Mark had very few friends. We stood with Mark and Grace to encourage them, and we shared our platform with them when almost no one else would. So Lindell, in this talk, he went on to say that Driscoll engaged in sinful behavior to sell books and to get clicks. And Lindell said that Driscoll actually never really apologized. Lindell read a bunch of private texts between him and Driscoll, and he claims that one said, well, I just crapped all over your event, that, Driscoll had said that to Lindell. And then Lindell claimed that Driscoll was trying to destroy Lindell's church, and, he's just really going after him. Then I listened to Driscoll's latest presentation in front of his Wednesday night men's crowd, which is called Real Men, where he made a few jokes about having had a busy week, but he never actually addressed the controversy directly. But then Lindell recently went before his congregation again. This time, he apologized for even inviting Mark Driscoll to the conference. And in addition to that, he also apologized for inviting Magala, the male stripper acrobat guy, to the conference. He apologized because of the, division that it brought. Okay? So if you're wondering, yes, I'm completely exhausted by this story. I completely am. Every day or two, a new kind of like wrinkle comes out, and it's like, I'm just not that interested in this story. And the main reason that I'm exhausted is because you can't know for sure who to believe. I mean, you've got these 2 strong personalities, Driscoll and Lindell, and you can't know exactly who to believe. You can surmise, you can read between the lines, but you can't know for sure. I think one thing that we can know for sure is that Lindell, he's the type of guy that if he feels any heat whatsoever, he will fold like laundry. That's just kind of like his thing. I feel like we can surmise that. But I can tell you this about this whole situation. Since all this broke, I have personally spoken with several people that know Driscoll personally, either now or they knew him very personally at a time in the past, okay? Some of whom you could say knew him intimately, right? So they weren't just like, hey, buddies, when I see you around, I'll say, hey, what's up? But knew him intimately, like they were, really tight friends and confidants. And this is what all of those people told me almost unanimously, like to a T. They basically said 4 things. You could put them in these 4 categories. Number 1, Driscoll is a marketing genius. He is very opportunistic and will do almost anything to get media attention. Okay, that his undergraduate degree is in marketing, and that's the type of guy he is, and that's how he thinks. Number 2, that Driscoll is a bully. So you heard that with the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. You heard that on all the, platforms, whenever he lost Mars Hill or left Mars Hill or was fired or whatever, that he's just a bully. The third thing they told me is that Driscoll is a habitual liar, and or that he has like a reality dysmorphia or something like that. So what I mean by that is, like, he could have watched that performance by the gay stripper guy, and let's say that guy wasn't a gay stripper. Okay, let's just take that out of it, because that certainly complicates the water. So let's just say it's John Doe, acrobat guy that starts out this conference. Driscoll may have actually watched that and thought to himself, that is a gay stripper. And regardless if that's the reality, that is his reality, and that's what he's going to roll with. And so everyone said that that's just kind of Mark's thing. He will either just lie to get what he wants, or he fervently and honestly believes something that is just completely not the truth. And the fourth thing that all these people said, again, all these people said these things that were not very nice and not very flattering about Mark Driscoll. And then they said this fourth thing, that he is one of the best modern Bible teachers that we have. Literally all of them said the exact same thing. They all had very negative opinions about him as a person and blah, blah, blah. But it was always, but he's an incredible Bible teacher. So with all that, getting into all those details and everything, let's get down to brass tacks. What in the world are we supposed to think about this story? And my answer is, I don't know. I really don't know. I have no idea, because I don't know Lindell or Driscoll personally. I just know people personally that knew them personally, right? Specifically Driscoll. But I do want to tell you what I've chosen to do, because I've gotten the entire spectrum. I've got guys telling me, hey, don't listen to all the crap. Driscoll's the man. He's the only one that's right in every situation, and you should just support him blindly. So that's one side. Then we've got the other side, which is mark and avoid. I've literally had multiple people that you would know their names tell me, Kyle, you have to mark and avoid him. You can't believe anything that the man says. So I have both of those ends flooding me almost constantly anytime Mark Driscoll comes out, or anytime I share a Mark Driscoll clip, or every time I mention him on the show. But this is what I've chosen to do. I've chosen to eat the fish and spit out the bones until further notice, because of what everyone said about Driscoll in terms of his Bible teaching. You may have problems with who he is as a person. You may think he is living in unrepentant sin concerning how he used to act when he had Mars Hill, or how he still acts right now, or that he's insulated himself at his new church out in Arizona, that there's no one that can tell him what to do, that he is basically a dictator out there, all of that. But that his Bible teaching is incredible. And so what I can say is, when I listen to his sermons, and when I listen to his presentations to his men's groups on Wednesday, it is incredibly edifying to me. It is incredibly edifying to me. And so since I don't know him personally, and since I can't make my own call on the type of man that he is and whether or not he's full of crap, all I can go on are his public comments. And almost 100% of the public comments that I hear from him are in a sermon, exegetical, expository preaching context. And when I talk to people that also do or have listened to his sermons, they don't have anything bad to say about the sermons. Now, the way they view the sermons is tinged because they know the man personally and they just don't like him. But at the same time, you're looking at a situation and you're judging the person's words, and that's all you can go by. You can't judge intentions, because we can't prove whether someone intended to do this or that. We can only go on what they say. And so again, until further notice, and whatever you guys want to do whatever you want to do. If you want to mark and avoid Mark Driscoll, great. If you want to defend him, like, no matter what, I would caution you against that, because you shouldn't do that with anybody. You've heard me say this before. Do not put all of your trust in me, or in your favorite pastor, or in your favorite politician, or your favorite musical artist, or something like that, because we are all deeply flawed. And if I haven't done it yet, I will do something that will so severely disappoint you that it could crush your entire world if you've put me up on this pedestal. Don't trust any of us. Trust Jesus. Trust in Jesus for the propitiation of your sins. Trust in Jesus for your salvation. Trust in the grace that has been given to you, that you've had to accept in order to be reconciled to the Father. Trust in that. Don't trust in man. Don't trust in us. But when it comes to Mark Driscoll, for me, I'm going to eat the fish and spit out the bones until further notice. Hey guys, real quick, as you've likely heard me talk about on the show before, it took me forever before I started taking supplements of any kind. I was always nervous about taking like whey protein and creatine or really anything beyond that because I was just afraid of what was in the product and if it was going to like give me cancer someday or something like that. And I was always scared of these companies, these supplement companies, just cutting corners and using low quality products and eventually putting things in their products that could cause problems for me and my body. So I've always wanted to partner up with an American company that uses high quality ingredients in their supplements. And that's why I want to remind you guys that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. So Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willink's American-based supplement company. So what are some of my favorite products that they make that I also use? They have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I love the peach flavor myself. They also make whey protein powder. The banana cream is my favorite. They make energy drinks. The Jocko Go energy drinks. My favorite is currently a tie between their iced tea lemonade and their pink lemonade flavors. I also use their Creel oil, their creatine, their vitamin D, and also their sleep aids. And they make a bunch of other stuff like ready to drink protein cookies, which are actually really delicious. My boys even like them, pre-workout powder, and much, much more. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you've got to put high quality products in your body. Try Jocko Fuel out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off of your order. All right, let's get into the first quick hitter here. Max Holloway delivering the greatest knockout in MMA history. Okay, so let's talk about the lead up to UFC 300. So UFC 300 was earlier this month, and man, I love the UFC. I love UFC nights. One of my favorite things is Saturday night, watching the UFC fights, having a cigar and a whiskey and just sitting there with my boys, and not my sons, they're asleep, but like my dudes, my foxhole guys, and watching fights. And we've known UFC 300 was coming for a long time. And the UFC was like, okay, we're going to put together the greatest MMA card of all time. There's going to be fights in the early prelims that are just going to absolutely blow your mind. But then as the fights were being announced, like the fights were interesting, but they didn't seem to like blow me away, I guess. And then they announced that Justin Gaethje, who should have been fighting for the lightweight 155 title, that he was going to be fighting Max Holloway, a 145er, for the BMF belt. So if you don't know what the BMF belt does or what it is there was a fight. I think Nate Diaz had just beaten Anthony Pettis or somebody like that, and he gets on the mic and he starts talking about, I'm gonna defend my BMF belt against, and he just starts like saying nonsense because he's a moron. But he says that he wants to defend his belt. He called it the BMF belt. BMF stands for baddest mother ever, right? Well, then the UFC runs with this and they actually create a belt. They literally create a belt for a guy with a mental disorder and have him fight for it. So he fights Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal just pieces him up because Nate Diaz isn't a very good fighter. And then so Jorge Masvidal gets the belt from The Rock, and so he's the BMF now. And so he ends up not being the BMF anymore because he's not in the UFC anymore, and like, I don't know. And so this belt, this like non-existent belt, just becomes this thing. And so then Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier fight for this stupid like non-existent belt at 155. Justin Gaethje head kicks Dustin Poirier, knocks him out. I think it was in the second round, and so he's the BMF champion. And so again, Justin Gaethje should be fighting Islam Makhachev for the 155 title, but then they announced that he's fighting Max Holloway. Now, Max Holloway has only fought once at 155, and it was years and years ago against Dustin Poirier, and Dustin Poirier just pieced him up for the entire fight. Max Holloway got absolutely destroyed in that fight, and so kind of just doing some MMA math in my head, I'm like, okay, well, Justin Gaethje just got through head kicking Dustin Poirier into another dimension, and now we've got Max Holloway coming up to a weight class that is not his weight class because he's a 145er, and he's going to fight him again. I'm like, Justin Gaethje's just going to run right through him. And, Max Holloway was kind of in this weird point in his career where he couldn't beat Alexander Volkanovski. They fought 3 times. He lost all 3 times. The last time he lost, incredibly one-sided fight. And so here's this great former champion, the former GOAT of that division, that is now just doing fun fights, right? And so he can't beat the top guy, but he can beat everybody else is kind of what happened. So we get into the fight itself. And I kind of got to this point where like, okay, I think I'm excited about this. But again, I still thought Justin Gaethje was just going to run right through him. And then the first round happens, and Gaethje doesn't look quite right, and Max Holloway is just kind of piecing him up. But Max Holloway is not a KO fighter. He's not a power fighter. He just swarms you with pressure and just with a lot of shots. He just can't knock anybody out with one punch, right? But at the very, very end of the first round, Max Holloway throws a spinning back kick and connects with Justin Gaethje's nose. In the last few seconds of the first round, shatters Justin Gaethje's nose. You can tell he's bothered by it. It affects his breathing. He's had a lot of nose problems before. He had got it fixed with surgery, but his nose is shattered. Then the second, third, fourth, and fifth round are basically like the rest of the fight. At one point, Justin Gaethje does drop Max Holloway. It was kind of like a flash knockdown. But for basically the entirety of the fight, Max Holloway is just piecing Justin Gaethje up. Again, the nose is bothering him. Justin Gaethje's not getting any of his, he's leg kicking Max Holloway, but it's not really working or anything like that. And so Max Holloway is on his way to winning a 50-45 decision because it's a 10-9 must system. He's going to win all 5 rounds because it was a championship fight for this non-existent belt. All 5 rounds, Max Holloway was going to win. And then, with 10 seconds left in the fight, this happens.
Shows some mortality. Look at this. Holloway just told him, stand right here. Oh, big connection late.
Literally, I'm not watching the video right now. I'm just listening to the audio. And like my heart rate just went up into the 80s just listening to this. Okay. So for those of you that have not seen it, you're one of about 14 people on the planet that has not seen the clip yet. Or if you're, just listening to the audio of this podcast. So Max Holloway is about to win the fight. There's 10 seconds left in the fight. All he has to do is not get knocked out and he wins the fight. Because you're not going to get subbed with 10 seconds left in a fight. You have won 24 minutes and 50 seconds of a fight on the biggest fight card in the history of the UFC. And Max Holloway points to the center of the octagon and says, "Let's go." Now, I think he fought, this was, 7-8 years ago, he fought a guy named Ricardo Lamas, right? I think it was who it was. And he did the same thing, a fight that he was winning. He was winning it going away. He points to the center of the octagon, and they just threw until the very end. It was one of the most gangster moments that we've ever seen. But Max Holloway points to the center of the octagon against one of the most dangerous strikers on planet Earth, and they just start throwing bombs, throwing absolute bombs. Max Holloway threw caution to the wind, and with 1 second left in the fight, he connects with a right and knocks Justin Gaethje completely out. Just folds him to the ground. Absolutely mind-blowing. I'm watching this with all my Foxhole guys and all that, and we're in complete shock. Complete and utter shock. Okay? Just absolutely stunning what had happened. So I'm going to go to my big takeaway on this one. Considering the context and circumstances, considering that it was UFC 300, that it was kind of like the people's main event, the fight that I think most people were looking forward to, that it's one of the biggest gates in UFC history, the most eyeballs, the most people watching and sharing on social media, that right there is the single greatest knockout in the history of MMA. There are other fantastic knockouts in terms of not just the knockout itself, but the importance. You have the ascendancy of Conor McGregor, and then he's fighting the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet, the greatest fighter in the history of the 145-pound division in Jose Aldo, and he knocks him out in 13 seconds. You've got one of my favorite knockouts of all time when Dan Henderson, I had him on the show last year and we talked about it. All this months and months of trash talk between him and Michael Bisping, and then he knocks him out and then he flies through the air and finishes him on the ground with another brutal shot when he was already knocked out. And there are many, many, many others. But considering everything about the circumstances and all the eyeballs, it is the greatest knockout in the history of MMA. But I didn't want to talk about it immediately on the show because you guys understand this, the concept of recency bias and also primacy and recency. Remember, the first thing we hear and the last thing that we hear. So there's so many times when a guy wins a fight and then later on that night, someone will be like, that's the greatest whatever that's ever happened. And, a team wins a game, that's the greatest performance I've ever seen. You need to kind of let everything die down for a little bit. Because, again, there were 2 more fights after that on the UFC 300 fight card. But I was going to bed at around 1 o'clock in the morning after that fight card, and I was still buzzing, right? My heart rate was still high just from that fight. But in the last couple of weeks, I've thought about this. That knockout might be the most incredible, mind-blowing thing that I've ever witnessed in sports in general. At least sports that I was watching live. And, I was texting around with some buddies trying to like think through this, like, man, I don't want to be hyperbolic. I don't want to sound crazy. But for me, when the St. Louis Cardinals were playing the Texas Rangers in the 2011 World Series, in Game 6 of that series, they were down to their last strike twice. But David Freese hits a bases-clearing triple to tie it up in the 9th, and then he comes back in the 11th and hits a walk-off home run. And he's a St. Louis boy, so even if you don't care about baseball or the Cardinals or the Rangers, that's an incredible moment. I thought back to the 2007 Fiesta Bowl in college football when Boise State, a mid-major conference, goes up against the Leviathan that is OU, that had Adrian Peterson in the game at the time, and they tie the game late in the 4th on a hook and lateral, and then they do a couple more trick plays and end up beating OU. That was absolutely mind-blowing. Another college football example, the Iron Bowl back in 2013, Bama versus Auburn, the kick six. So tie game. Bama is trying to hit like a 57-yard field goal or something like that. Well, Auburn puts one guy at the back of the end zone, and the field goal is short. He catches it, and he runs it back 109 yards to beat Bama. Then I also thought about Michael Phelps back in 2008. So he's in the Olympics in Beijing. He's going for 8 gold medals, and it's a 4x100 meter free relay. And the USA was losing. And you're thinking, crap, he's going to get 7 gold medals and not 8. So he's only going to tie the record, not set the record. But then in the final leg, which he was not swimming, I forget who was swimming. It may have been Ryan Lochte or something like that. The USA wins by 0.08 seconds. All of those examples and more are one of those things where it's like time feels like it stands still for a second. Everything's happening in slow motion. And then it's just like craziness, crazy reaction. I feel like this Max Holloway moment is bigger than those moments. I just feel like it is, considering everything that was on the line. And what this means for Max Holloway is he can basically do whatever he wants. It looks like he's going to fight Ilia Topuria for the 145-pound championship. They might try to do that in Spain, make it a huge fight. I've heard people say that, he's next in line for the 155 title, so he may fight Islam Makhachev after Makhachev defends his title against Dustin Poirier or whoever wins that fight. I've heard that he may fight Conor McGregor because Conor McGregor has a win over Max Holloway early in his career, that all those things are on the table. Max can basically write his ticket, and it's just one of the most incredible moments. That's why I wanted to spend the time actually talking about it. But I did want to do one quick bonus quick hitter and takeaway from UFC 300 because some of you may have missed this. So in the main event of UFC 300, it was Alex Pereira. He knocked out Jamal Hill in the first round of that fight. So it was kind of a crazy KO as well because Jamal Hill hits Alex Pereira in the cup with a kick. And so Herb Dean's trying to come in to stop the fight to time out for the nut shot. And he doesn't even look at Herb Dean. He just basically holds his hand out like, no, I'm just going to keep fighting. And like 5 seconds later, he hits him with a left hook that wasn't even flush and just puts the lights out. So Alex Pereira, just an incredible, incredible story. Hasn't been an MMA fighter for very long, and he's already been the 185-pound champion, 205 champion. Now he's talking about going up to heavyweight. So he gets a KO. That's great. But after the fight, he gets his jiu-jitsu black belt. Now, people were kind of making fun of it because it's like, oh, you got your black belt in jiu-jitsu, a ground discipline for knocking out, a guy. Like, that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. But Glover Teixeira and, his other coaches were giving him his jiu-jitsu black belt. And Dana White, again, this is the final fight of the biggest fight card in UFC history from top to bottom, the biggest event in UFC history. And Dana White's job is to put the belt on the champion after he is announced by Bruce Buffer. Out of reverence for the jiu-jitsu black belt, Dana White puts the UFC 205-pound lightweight championship belt on his shoulder. And he literally whispers in Pereira's ear and says, hey, I'm not going to put that over your black belt. It reminded me of when Tyron Woodley was, dominating the welterweight division of the UFC, and he was just knocking dudes out, and he was defending his title against Darren Till. And so Tyron Woodley's kind of a knockout artist or wrestler. Well, he submits Darren Till, I think it was with a Darce choke or something like that. And he had just defended his UFC belt for the, second or third time. It's a big deal. Darren Till was like the heir apparent to winning the fight and taking the championship for the division. Tyron Woodley just runs right through him, ends up subbing him, and they give him his black belt in the octagon, and he breaks down in tears. He was shocked, and then he just completely broke down in tears. He just won the UFC belt. He just made a few $100,000 for, fighting this guy, but he was in just complete shock because he got his black belt. So my bonus takeaway on this first quick hitter is you've just got to start training jiu-jitsu. I know so many men, probably hundreds of men at this point, that have started training jiu-jitsu because of this podcast, in part because of this podcast, I constantly talk about the benefits of training jiu-jitsu. Obviously, it's good for, your cardio, and it's good for, if you're not very flexible, you'll get more flexible so you can be better at jiu-jitsu. If you're not very strong, you'll get stronger so you can be better at jiu-jitsu. It's good for your brain because when you're doing a round, you can't think about all the other stressors in your life because you're trying to like not get killed, while someone else is trying to fold you up in your clothes while you're still in them. Like, all that's very, very good. But just think about these guys. Some of the biggest names in fighting at the time when they were fighting, and then they get their black belt, and that superseded everything else. Because in order to get your black belt, because jiu-jitsu is a real fighting style. This isn't, kung fu or karate or Wing Chun or any of that nonsense where you can get, your black belt in like 2 years from some fat dude down by the airport. Like, this is a legit thing where if you train 3 to 5 times a week and compete fairly often, it's going to take you 10 years at most legit schools to get your black belt. I'm 7 years in, I'm, purple knocking on the door, brown, right? And so I'm kind of on pace to in a decade, get my black belt. That's a PhD, y'all. Think about it in the school context. You get your undergrad in 4 years, you do 2 years of master's program, and then you go get, 4 more years and get your PhD. That's a PhD in whooping people. Like, man, and just think about how much that means. All the black belts in our school, when they've gotten promoted, I think we have 15 or so black belts that have been promoted. Some of the baddest dudes, some of the toughest dudes I know, and almost all of them cried when they got their black belts. Because it means that much. You've literally put in hundreds, if not thousands of hours dedicated to something that is very, very mentally and physically difficult. And you arrive, and then you don't stop. You don't get your black belt and stop training. I'm sure there are people out there like that. But you get your black belt and you keep training. You get your black belt and you realize, man, there are guys that have been black belts for longer than I've been training, and I just got my black belt. So to a degree, it's like, well, this journey just started. So if you're not training jiu-jitsu, get you an Origin gi. Use our promo code Undaunted to get 10% off. Get you a gi and get in the room. Our next quick hitter here, Joe Biden trying to turn Easter into tranny Christmas. So this is according to the White House themselves. I'm actually going to read from this proclamation that they made on Easter this year. On Transgender Day of Visibility, we honor the extraordinary courage and contributions of transgender Americans and reaffirm our nation's commitment to forming a more perfect union, where all people are created equal and treated equally throughout their lives. I am proud that my administration has stood for justice from the start, working to ensure that the LGBTQI+ community can live openly in safety with dignity and respect. I am proud to have appointed transgender leaders to my administration and to have ended the ban on transgender Americans serving openly in our military. Transgender Americans are part of the fabric of our nation. They deserve and are entitled to the same rights and freedoms as every other American, including the most fundamental freedom to be their true selves. But extremists are proposing hundreds of hateful laws that target and terrify transgender kids and their families, silencing teachers, banning books, and even threatening parents, doctors, and nurses with prison for helping parents get care for their children. No one should have to be brave just to be themselves. Today, we send a message to all transgender Americans. You are loved. You are heard. You are understood. You belong. You are America, and my entire administration and I have your back. Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim March the 31st, 2024 as Transgender Day of Visibility. I call upon all Americans to join us in lifting up the lives and voices of transgender people throughout our nation and to work toward eliminating violence and discrimination based on gender identity. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand this 29th day of March in the year of our Lord, 2024, and of the independence of the United States of America, and 248th. Then he signs his name there at the bottom. So let's just go back to some of these comments. And I didn't read the entire statement. I just read a lot of the pertinent parts. So at the beginning, he talks about the extraordinary courage of transgender people. Well, you say there are people of extraordinary courage, but then you also say that if I don't use their given pronouns or names or pretend that they are the opposite sex, that they're going to kill themselves. I've been told that if you don't basically go along with the delusion of a 7-year-old boy that thinks he's a 7-year-old girl, that the only outcome for that child is that they will kill themselves. So how can you simultaneously have extraordinary courage and when anybody says that you're not the thing that you purport to be, that you just decide you're going to kill yourselves? that doesn't really work out. But he also says he's proud to have appointed transgender people to his administration and also to the military. Let's talk about the military part. If you have flat feet, you can't make it into the military. If you're too fat or have been on SSRIs too long, you can't get into the military. They're probably going to change all that because basically everyone's fat and on SSRIs now. So that'll eventually change. But basically what he's saying is that I am proud that I have removed the ban on people with open mental illness serving in our military. Because that's what gender dysphoria is. If a grown man thinks that he is a grown woman, they have a mental disorder. Or they're just cosplaying as a woman. Or they are sexually aroused by the thoughts of themselves as a woman or dressing up like a woman. That's autogynephilia. So he is proud that he's allowing that in the military. And we're shocked that corn-fed Okies and, farm-bred guys from Nebraska aren't just tripping over themselves to, sign up for the military. But he also talked about how extremists are proposing hundreds of hateful laws. So again, he thinks it is hateful for states like Oklahoma or Florida or other red states to say, yeah, we're not going to be cutting off the healthy breast tissue of teenage girls that have a mental disorder and need mental help. We're not going to be shaving parts of their arm off and then wrapping it into a phallic-like, flesh thing and then sewing it on top of the vagina of a girl to make this fake penis. We're not going to be giving little boys puberty blockers that will sterilize them and cause them to have massive issues in the long run. We're not going to do that. But those are extremists that are hateful. He also talked about the fact that he was proclaiming that March the 31st was Transgender Day of Visibility. So this is where we need to get into the fact that, most people were like, I can't believe that he chose Easter as Transgender Day of Visibility. Well, he didn't choose Easter as the day because March 31st is apparently Transgender Day of Visibility. But the way people were talking about it was as if this was as old as time. That since time immemorial, we have known that March the 31st was Transgender Day of Visibility, that the Biden administration didn't do this on purpose to take a pot shot at Christians or Christianity or conservatism or any of that type of stuff. It's just the way it fell on the calendar. But even the Obama administration didn't celebrate Transgender Day of Visibility. And they were the wokest presidential administration until the Bidens. They didn't celebrate this. This just started happening with the Biden administration. Okay, so no, he didn't choose this day, but this could have easily been dealt with another way than doing it on Easter on the most important day on the Christian calendar. He also talked about eliminating violence. It's not a real thing. These people that are being murdered, these supposedly trans people that are being murdered, most of them are not being murdered because they identify as the opposite sex. They're being murdered because they also do illicit drugs and they get in drug deals and it goes poorly, or they're engaging in prostitution and that also ends poorly. But the real thing here, and this is just how he ends all of his proclamations, but he talks about in the year of our Lord, that in the year of our Lord, we're proclaiming this. If you think Joe Biden is a sincere Catholic, you're a fool. If you think that Joe Biden is a Christian, you're a fool. He has no reverence for the Lord. I can't even tell you that he believes in the Lord. But again, the reaction from the right was complete apoplexy and, for good reason. The reaction from the left is this is a nothing burger. But let's go to the big takeaway here. This administration, the Joe Biden administration, is the most hostile United States presidential administration towards Christianity and Christians in our nation's history, and there is not a close second. Again, Barack Obama came into office in 2008 as, the great savior. He was going to, bring the races together, and it wasn't going to be about red America and blue America. It was just going to be about America. But as things worked out throughout his administration, he became incredibly, incredibly radical. But he looks like a moderate compared to the Biden administration. Now, again, I don't think Joe Biden's a Christian. He's certainly not a Catholic. He's certainly not a practicing Catholic. But also, he's not in control of his own faculties. They have him walking down the short stairs of Air Force One, and he's still having problems getting up and down those. He has no idea where he's going. The other day, he was walking down the short stairs, and then he turned around to look at people to be like, where do I go? It's like, look, moron, just walk down the stairs. You've got 3 more steps. Your job is to get from inside the plane to the ground. Just freaking keep going. He's not in control of his faculties, and he's probably going to be elected president again for a second term. But he is allowing for people that hate God and to hate Christians to do things inside of his administration that literally go counter to the dictates of God. And so again, any of you Christians out there that are thinking about voting for Joe Biden in November, what's wrong with you? Again, this administration, if they had complete power, complete control of the courts, and complete control of both houses of Congress and the White House, they would have abortion for any reason at any point of pregnancy and paid for by taxpayer dollars and without apology. They would remove all laws that would ban the transing of the children, that would ban boys from competing in women's sports. And then who the heck else knows what we would have in terms of hate speech or hate crime laws. So if I were to proclaim on this podcast that it is abominable for a man and a man to have a sexual relationship, I could go to prison. It would be just like what we saw in Scotland, where if given the power, you will enforce it on your enemies. And the Joe Biden administration is the enemy of God. They certainly are. All right, next quick hitter here. Caitlyn Clark somehow saving and ruining women's college basketball simultaneously. So let's talk about women's basketball. Not a fan, okay? I've watched women's basketball here and there throughout the years. I've accidentally been at women's basketball games in high school and college. Basketball is one of the most athletic games possible, and watching women do it is just not entertaining to me. You may love it, and hey, that's your thing, but to me, this is a game about explosion and jumping and dunking, and it's just not what we get from women. That's not what they're best at, is these explosive movements, quick twitch. It's just not really what we see. So not a fan of college basketball. But a few years ago, I remember seeing highlights of this white girl from Iowa named Caitlyn Clark. And she would just be dribbling up the floor, and then she would just pull up and shoot, which is not really a thing that you see, because kind of the thing with women's basketball is they're going to stand there and then they're going to get the ball and they're just going to do this kind of weird squat thing and then take their shot, right? But Caitlyn Clark wasn't doing that. She was shooting the ball like Steph Curry. She was shooting the ball like a dude. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. But then I went back to, sports that I actually can't enjoy. And so I didn't really follow Caitlyn Clark, Iowa, or women's basketball at all. But then last year, there was a lot of attention around LSU and Iowa in the women's Final Four. They're in the national championship game, and the trash talk that happened between one of the LSU players and Caitlyn Clark and all that. And so it kind of made the rounds. But then this year, it seemed like I couldn't go a few days without seeing a Caitlyn Clark highlight, even just scrolling Instagram or scrolling Twitter or something like that. So then we get to the women's tournament. We get to the Final Four. And the thing is every subsequent game that Caitlyn Clark and Iowa played in, the ratings were astonishingly high. I think for the Elite Eight game, it was like 12 million viewers. And then for their Final Four game, I don't know who they beat, it was 14 million viewers. And then in the final, right, the Natty, when they played South Carolina and got destroyed, that was like 18 million viewers. It was the most viewed women's college basketball game, I think, of all time. It had more views than any of the men's games. And I think it had more views than any of the NBA Finals games from last year, where Denver beat whoever, right? And so this was like a big deal. This was like becoming a cultural phenomenon. And so you would be thinking that everyone would have only nice things to say about Caitlyn Clark. But this just wasn't the case. That there were people like me, people like my buddies that don't watch women's sports, or certainly not women's basketball, that are suddenly talking about Caitlyn Clark and sharing clips around. Did you see what she just did? Did you see about the game that she had? Look at her line that she had in this game. Isn't this crazy? But the hate that Caitlyn Clark was getting was not coming from men, certainly not coming from men like me that don't even watch the sport, but from women inside of her own sport. So let's go to this story from the USA Today. Even without a championship, her season was still incredible. She managed to captivate basketball fans everywhere. Just about everyone seemed impressed by what Clark managed to pull off this season. Everyone except Diana Taurasi, that is. The Phoenix Mercury legend just hasn't really seemed that impressed by Clark over the last few weeks. She took a few shots at the soon-to-be WNBA rookie during her NCAA tournament run, and now the Mercury are marketing the team's upcoming game against the Fever, where Clark will be presumably drafted by, as Diana Taurasi versus the rookie. It's wild. Okay, so since this story was written, Caitlyn Clark has been drafted number 1 overall by the WNBA. But I want to go right to, or not by the WNBA, but in the WNBA by the Mercury or whatever. But let's go to my big takeaway number 1. I've got a couple. They're saying this. People like Diana Taurasi are saying this out of an astonishing amount of jealousy. Okay? Diana Taurasi has been considered by many, I guess, to be the greatest female basketball player of all time. I don't really know that. I couldn't name 5 women that have played in the WNBA, but I know a lot of people would say Diana Taurasi is probably the college GOAT, or was until Caitlyn Clark came along, and now she's the professional women's basketball GOAT. Okay. But the reason Diana Taurasi and a lot of these people are saying this is out of jealousy, because of the attention that she's gotten, the money that she has gotten and will be getting, but there's something even more nefarious afoot here. They are saying these things, people that don't like Caitlyn Clark, they're saying these things because she's a white, straight female that played for a university in a red state. Because if she were a black lesbian that played for a university in a blue state, she would be touted as the greatest athlete of all time. I'm serious. Again, she played for Iowa, right? Doesn't get redder than Iowa for the most part, right? But let's say she was a black lesbian that played for Cal Berkeley. Again, ESPN would just completely slobber over her, and they wouldn't allow any critique, because that's what ESPN does. If they like you, if you're approved, if you meet their matrix of things that they want to support, they're not going to really allow anyone on their airwaves to be critical of you. It's just not what they're going to do. But she got so much criticism for just playing. And people were so excited when they lost to South Carolina because they're like, yeah, see, she's not that good. You would have these dorks that would say, oh, well, she's not going to be complete without a championship. She can't be considered the greatest female basketball player in women's college basketball history unless she wins a championship. It's like, dude, there's a tournament. Do you realize how many great college basketball players that there have been that didn't win the tournament? Because it's a tournament. You play one game over a 7-game series. It's really hard to accidentally win 4 games, but you can accidentally win 1 game in a tournament where you're playing today and then playing again in another 2 days or something like that. And so it's just all this nonsense. But again, I think it's because she was white, she was straight, she doesn't seem to be leaning into any of the culture war stuff, so she couldn't be the darling of the liberal media or of ESPN. But I repeat myself. But my big takeaway number 2 on this is that people just don't understand basic economics. So what I'm talking about is she gets drafted number 1 overall to go to the WNBA, and I think her salary is like $70,000 or $80,000 a year. Now, what is the name of the kid that just got drafted number 1 overall by the Spurs? The dude that's like Wimbyana or whatever, the dude that's like 8 foot tall and like a 10-foot wingspan or whatever. So he's making like 12 or 13 million a year as a rookie in the NBA, and people are putting those numbers beside one another, and they're talking about it, and they're saying, you see, misogyny. This is hatred of women, right? But it's like, if you understand anything about economics, you can't say things like that, because people are like, they need to be making the same amount, right? They somehow need to be making $13 million. But as a lot of people have pointed out, and they've actually broken down the math, the WNBA has been around for 25, 30 years. The WNBA has never turned a profit. They've never operated in the black. They've only operated in the red. The only reason that it's still a league is because the NBA subsidizes their entire league so that they can have a league. Because people will say these things. They'll be like, the women in the WNBA should make their fair share. And I guarantee you don't want that. Because again, someone did the math and they looked at, okay, let's say they weren't getting any subsidies from the men's league, from the NBA, from the actual basketball league. Those women would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to play for those teams. So if you're being nice, they would be making $0. But if you're being legitimate and you're actually just looking at it as a spreadsheet, they would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to play the sport that they want to play. And so they should be thankful for every single dollar of salary that they make. But they're not thankful. They're a bunch of whiny babies. And then you've got these people that apparently don't know anything about anything and certainly don't know how money works or numbers work, saying that they should be making the same amount of money as the men, but the NBA turns billions of dollars of profit every year. That's why these salaries are the way they are. That's why LeBron James and Steph Curry and these guys make $50 million a year just in salary. Has nothing to do with their endorsement deals or any other business deals, just in salary. It's because the money's there, y'all. You can't be paid with money that isn't there. Going back to my MMA stuff, everyone would always complain about Mighty Mouse not making enough money and not getting the love. Well, nobody cared to watch him fight. It's prize fighting. You might be the best X's and O's fighter on the planet Earth, but if nobody cares to watch you fight, there's no money to pay you with. This is not a charity. This is a business. Get real. All right, the next quick hitter here. It's a heavy one. It's a tough one. But a gay man in Chicago being arrested for allegedly distributing child pornography and planning to rape his newborn son. So this is according to the Chicago Sun-Times. A Chicago veterinarian and dog show judge allegedly distributed child pornography and had plans to sexually abuse his newborn son, according to federal prosecutors. Adam Stafford King, 39, of Elburn, allegedly sent several images and videos depicting child pornography to a person in New York via the messaging app Telegram while using the handle @PervChildDude. I'm not exactly what that is. PervChildDude. Not sure what that is. According to a complaint filed last week in the U.S. District Court of the Northern District of Illinois. King was arrested Friday, March the 23rd, and charged with distribution of child pornography, according to federal court records. In one message, King said that he had previously drugged and sexually abused his nieces and nephews by giving them the allergy medicine Benadryl, the complaint claims. He also allegedly said that he and his husband are expecting a child by surrogate due in spring and that he plans to sexually assault the child after it's born. King sent a photograph of a baby's outfit in the same text conversation, according to the complaint. He also sent ultrasound photographs of the unborn child on 2 separate occasions. An absolutely diabolically evil and horrific story. Big takeaway number 1, I've got a couple. Castration, public execution. Who says no? Again, if found guilty by a jury of his peers, because he needs to have his day in court, he is a due process, right? But if he's guilty, why would we not castrate him and then publicly execute him? Why would we not send a message to other sexual deviants that if you distribute this type of material and if you do the things that you said that you want to do and that you have done to children, why in the world would we not punish you? Again, I go back to scripture in the book of Judges where it talks about when you do not bring justice speedily, it allows people with evil hearts to continue doing the things that they're doing. So let's say he is convicted. In Illinois, I don't think they do the death penalty in Illinois. It's a blue state. But let's say he was in Oklahoma, right? Here, we're going to throw you to the front of the line if you do something like this. But then he's going to be on death row for 20 years, maybe 30 years. And then maybe have his sentence commuted by some squishy governor at the 11th hour? No. If he is convicted, he should get one more chance, right? So, you may have had a bad trial, so maybe get new lawyers and all that. You get one more chance, and if the sentence is upheld, you're executed at dawn. And for those that do these types of crimes against children, you're castrated first. So you will be in utter suffering until you're mercifully executed in public. And I don't care how they do it. Firing squad, hanging, guillotine. Who says no? Have we somehow evolved past executing people in an expedient way that have done these horrific things? Why in the world should taxpayers have to pay for that piece of filth to live for all this time? Why should we have to do that? Big takeaway number 2, I want you to remember what I've been saying about surrogacy and gay adoption. Talked about this a little bit on the IVF episode, and I've talked about it when other stories like this have come up. This will keep happening because we're doing mail order babies for gay men. There was a story I talked about, I think last year, where it was these 2 gay fathers that were married, quote unquote married, and then they adopted these 2 boys, and they were not only sexually abusing them and raping them, they were pimping them out to their gay pedophilic friends. These 2 should have never been allowed to adopt these boys to begin with. And now we're allowing gay men to swirl their sperm, to take an egg donor, combine that, use the IVF process to then implant that human being into the rented uterus and subsequently womb of a woman. And then on the back end, they just hand it right over. They don't allow this baby to feel the touch and warmth of its mother outside the womb. They just take it from one room to another room, and they allow these satanic losers to sit there on a bed as if they had just got through doing something, holding their baby that they ordered from a catalog. They got the right type of egg donor at the right time of year and the right type of surrogate and the right nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And we just hand them over. And you think stuff like this isn't going to keep happening? Again, yes, I'm fully aware that there are heterosexual couples that will foster or adopt children and sexually abuse them. Obviously, there are plenty of examples of that. And I think that those people as well should be castrated and publicly executed. But in situations like this, the best case scenario is you're putting a child into a household where an abominable sin of homosexuality is celebrated, and they're not going to be seeing a mother of any kind. That's best case scenario. One of the worst case scenarios is something like this, where literally this satanic piece of filth was able to order a child with his husband with the plan of sexually abusing them after they were born. Help me understand. There's not a good argument for it, I'm telling you. All right, last quick hitter of the day, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, that's the NAIA, adopting a new policy banning males from competing in women's sports. So this is according to CNN. The NAIA voted to adopt a new policy on Monday, this was a couple months ago, that effectively bans transgender women from participating in most of its women's intercollegiate sports programs. The NAIA, an athletic association consisting of 241 mostly small member colleges and universities as of 2023, governs intercollegiate athletics for more than 83,000 student athletes, according to its website. According to the organization's new transgender participation policy, only NAIA student athletes whose biological sex is female may participate in NAIA-sponsored female sports. They define biological sex as having distinguishing characteristics that can be supported by birth certificate or signed affidavit. Scientists and advocates for the LGBTQ community argue that such definitions do not reflect the biological complexity of sex and gender, and they stress that biology does not override a person's gender identity. That was printed in a news article. I have to read this last section here first. That's why I included it. Scientists and advocates for the LGBTQ community argue that such definitions do not reflect the biological complexity of sex and gender, and they stress that biology does not override a person's gender identity. That's presented as news, y'all. Right to my big takeaway here. Because a lot of people have talked about, NAIA, great job, NCAA is on the clock. NCAA is never going to do this. But feminism and transgenderism can't mix. And you're seeing that on full display here. But in the victim Olympics, apparently trannies are higher than real women. Because feminists have fought for equality. Right to vote. Right to drive in some countries. Making the same amount as men, given the same opportunity, and the glass ceiling and shattering all the glass ceiling and something like that. And trannies are like, yeah, hold my beer. Dudes in dresses are like, yeah, watch this. And these women are shocked. These third and fourth wave feminism women are absolutely shocked that dudes in dresses are usurping them in the victim Olympics. Because it used to be, that poor woman, she's only making 70 cents for every, 70 cents on the dollar that a man makes, which is completely bunk and completely made up. Like, these poor women not getting the same opportunities. They're not getting into these colleges, and they're not making as much as the men, all that other stuff. But now we have this. Feminism and transgenderism, these are both movements of the left. They're trying to figure out, how do we operate together? Because LGBT, the T's and the L's, that they can't really jive. Or just the feminists, they can't really understand the T part. Because it doesn't really mix here. It doesn't really work. Because you can't advocate for the rights of women and protecting those rights, and then also say, yeah, but let's go ahead and let men in women's spaces. Let's allow men to go into female changing areas like locker rooms and just, swing their wieners around and watch the women as they undress. How can a feminist support that? They certainly can't. But you will be seen as bigoted if you don't support that. So you have a feminist like the author of the Harry Potter series, J.K. Rowling. She's very open about wanting to protect women and girls, and she's seen as a transphobe by saying, no, you shouldn't compete in women's sports. It's not fair. What's the reason? It has nothing to do with, lung capacity and red blood cell count and all that type of stuff. It's because it's not right. It's because you're not a woman. This is easy. You're not a girl, so you can't play girls' sports, boy. You can't do that. But as we continue to see this unfold, we have the left going further left on this issue, specifically as it pertains to transing the kids. We have the Title IX changes that have come, and that just came here recently. I'll be talking about that on a future episode, what the Biden administration has done to Title IX, basically destroying women's sports in a lot of ways, allowing men to apply for women's colleges and for women's scholarships and taking women's opportunities. But again, where this all goes is nowhere good. except for the fact that these feminists might wake up and realize, wait a minute, the logical outworking of a leftist liberal point of view and logic, if there is such a thing, is this. It's people that are so clearly not women taking rights away and opportunities away from women. So maybe they'll turn around and get real and be like, wait a minute, I need to question everything that has gotten me to this point philosophically, because it just doesn't work in real life. So hopefully that happens, but I'm not going to hold my breath. All right, guys, before we let you go, we're going to do a quick resilience boost at Undaunted.Life. Our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Again, donate. If you want one of these signed books from Joby, and they are going fast since Tuesday, you've got to go on there, do a one-time donation of $30 or more. Half of that goes to us. Half of that goes to the Pro-Life Pregnancy Center here in our town. It's great. Make sure you put your name and your address in the notes on that. So that is going to be there. I've also got all the links to the stuff from the Driscoll controversy and everything from the quick hitter. So you can check it all out there. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. Also, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.